You ever have one of those moments where you just know trouble is coming the second someone looks at you? That's exactly what happened the moment I stepped onto Cabin Trail. I wasn't even halfway up the path when this woman Karen, and yes, she fit the name-locked eyes with me like I had just trespassed onto sacred ground. Her jaw tightened, her phone was out in seconds, and before I could even say good morning, she was already dialing 911. Now here's the thing, this wasn't just some random hiking trail. Cabin Trail runs along the edge of private and public land. And yeah, there's been drama there before. But what Karen didn't know, what made this whole thing twist in a way she never expected, was that I wasn't just some average hiker. I was there under special protection, backed by people she couldn't even imagine. From the way she was shouting into the phone, you'd think I was some kind of threat. She pointed, took photos, tried to block the trail. Her voice carried all the way through the trees. There's a suspicious person on the trail. They don't belong here, but here's where it gets wild. As she stood there, waiting for law enforcement to show up and back her up, things didn't go the way she thought they would. What Karen didn't realize was that the very people she expected to come in and drag me off that trail, they knew exactly who I was. And more importantly, they knew why I was there. Let's just say when the deputy arrived and stepped out of the car, Karen's entire attitude shifted. Fast, but that was only the beginning, because what happened next revealed a truth no one, not even I, was ready for. Karen took a step back the moment the deputy made eye contact with me and gave a slight nod. You could actually see the confusion hit her face like a wave. Gosh, she had her arms crossed, trying to act like she still had control of the situation, but the vibe had already shifted. She probably expected backup, someone to take her side instantly, but instead, she was left standing there as the deputy walked straight toward me. Now let me rewind for a second and explain why this moment hit so differently. A few weeks before this hike, I'd been involved in a quiet community effort tied to land rights near the Cabin Trail area. Nothing flashy or dramatic, but enough that a few higher-ups got involved, people who wanted things handled carefully and quietly. Because of that, I was placed under a sort of informal protection agreement. Not full-on security detail or anything, but I had names to call, folks who knew where I was, and most importantly, law enforcement in the area had already been briefed. So, when Karen called 911 that day, thinking she was doing the neighborhood some big favor, she had no idea she was calling the very people who were already looking out for me. I wasn't breaking any rules. I wasn't trespassing. I was on that trail for a reason, and more than one set of eyes had made sure I had every right to be there. But that didn't stop Karen. She started in again loud, spinning a whole story about feeling unsafe, claiming I was recording her even though my phone hadn't left my pocket. She was fishing for something, anything, that would put her back in control. What she didn't know was that someone else had also been watching quietly. From the wood's end, they were about to change everything. The sound of twigs snapping in the brush pulled all our eyes toward the tree line. Karen went silent for the first time, her mouth slightly open like she wasn't sure if she should be scared or ready to start barking again. The deputy instinctively put a hand near his belt, not in a threatening way, just cautious. That's when a man stepped out, middle-aged, wearing a ranger vest and carrying a thick folder tucked under one arm. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. He looked straight at Karen, then at the deputy, and finally at me. I thought, "I might run into you today," he said to me, almost like we were old friends. Karen turned to him quickly. "Finally, someone who can explain what's going on. This person doesn't belong here. They're causing problems." The ranger didn't even flinch. "Actually, ma'am, they're here on assignment. This trail is part of an ongoing review for protected land status. That folder in my hand, it's got maps, permits, and letters from the county. So unless you've been briefed by the state, I'd step back. The color drained from her face, but that didn't mean she was done. Karen took a deep breath, looked between us all, and started playing a different game. A lie, wasn't they? HOA informed. Why are strangers walking these woods without our consent? This whole thing feels sketchy. That's when the subplot started to unfold. Turns out, there had been whispers around town about illegal zoning, secret land deals, and even quiet efforts to stop conservation plans. People like Karen weren't just nosy, they were scared of losing power. This trail. It was more than just dirt and trees. It represented change, and not everyone wanted that. And as the ranger flipped open that folder, something in Karen's eyes changed. Not just anger now, but fear. She knew something was coming, and it wasn't in her favor. The ranger handed the folder to the deputy without saying a word. The silence between the three of them was so heavy, even the birds in the trees seemed to go quiet. Karen stood there, stiff arms crossed, watching like she was waiting for a mistake, something she could pounce on. But the moment the deputy flipped through the papers, his entire posture shifted. He looked at me, then back at Karen, then raised his eyebrows at the ranger. These signatures. This goes straight to the county office, the deputy said quietly. Karen's jaw clenched. So what? Now anyone can just walk through our trails and claim they're special. The ranger calmly replied, not anyone. But this isn't your trail, ma'am. It's public access tied to environmental restoration. You've been told before. Karen's face twitched. That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't her first time interfering. And the way the deputy glanced at her said it all. She had a record of complaints, maybe even previous warnings. But now, she was standing in the middle of something bigger. This wasn't just about a hiker anymore. I stayed quiet, but I could feel my pulse climbing. Something about the tension in the air made me feel like this wasn't over. The deputy and ranger exchanged a look like they both knew more than they were saying out loud then. The ranger turned slightly toward me and asked, "You didn't see anyone else up there, did you? Near the northern edge of the trail, before I could answer, Karen cut in, her voice suddenly shaky. What are you talking about? There's no one else out here. But the way she said it didn't sound like a question, it sounded like a cover-up. That's when we heard it. Another voice faint coming from deeper in the trees. It wasn't yelling. It was more like a whisper. And it wasn't just one voice. Everyone froze. That soft whisper, drifting from the northern edge of the trail, didn't sound like wind or wildlife, fit sounded human. The ranger stepped forward instinctively, eyes narrowed, scanning the trees. The deputy held up a hand, signaling everyone to stay back, and carefully reached for his radio. Karen's face went pale, lips tight like she was holding something in. That reaction didn't go unnoticed. The ranger glanced at her just long enough for suspicion to set in. "What's going on, Karen?" he asked, his tone suddenly sharper. She shook her head too quickly. "Nothing, I don't know. Probably hikers. This trail's been too crowded lately." But we all knew she was lying. That voice in the trees, it wasn't random. There was something hidden up there, and Karen clearly knew more than she let on. The deputy turned to me quietly. "You said you were assigned to document the trail for environmental records, right? Did anyone mention unauthorized structures in the area?" That caught me off guard. "No, just erosion spots and flag markers. Nothing about structures." The ranger nodded, jaw tight. "That's because they weren't supposed to exist. But last week, one of our drones picked up signs of movement temporary shelters. We thought it was campers, but if what I'm hearing is right, this could be tied to those zoning violations." Karen took a shaky step back, eyes darting toward the woods like she was ready to bolt. That's when the second twist dropped. Out of the brush came a man, dressed in dark clothes, holding what looked like rolled-up survey maps. He froze when he saw us. His eyes landed on Karen, and instead of looking surprised, he looked angry. "You said no one would be here today," he snapped. The ranger stepped between them, voice firm. "Who is this man, Karen?" And that's when everything really started to unravel. The faded signature on that old document shifted everything. It belonged to a private developer with a long history of trying to quietly buy up protected lands through loopholes. Turns out, Karen and her mystery partner had been working with him behind the scenes, slowly redrawing maps and pushing false HOA claims to blur boundaries and gain control over the trail area. It was a quiet land grab disguised as community protection, and it almost worked. Over the next week, investigators pieced together records, emails, and testimonies. Karen wasn't acting alone, but she had been the loudest and most public face of the operation. She'd used her influence in the neighborhood to push fear, make false reports, and chase off anyone who didn't fall in line. But once the truth came out, people began to speak up. Neighbors who once stayed silent started telling their own stories of intimidation, of being lied to, of being kept in the dark. The land is now officially flagged for full environmental review, with county oversight expanded across the Cabin Trail system. That means not only is the area protected, but it'll be monitored to make sure nothing like this happens again. The ranger, who'd been watching for months, told me I'd shown up at just the right time, not just to hike, but to witness. Looking back, it's wild how a simple walk on a trail turned into a web of secrets and power plays. But it reminded me of something important. Sometimes the loudest voices aren't the ones protecting what matters. Sometimes they're just trying to drown out the truth. So next time you hear someone shouting about what's theirs, take a closer look. Because Cabin Trail didn't just lead me through the woods. It led me straight into a truth no one wanted found.